Two British teenage sisters are among those missing after last weekend's Hamas attack on southern Israel.
Also on the programme tonight, 2 people are shot dead in Brussels in what's being described as a terror attack. The gunman is still...
My name is Simon Plosker. I'm the editorial director of Honest Reporting. We are based in Jerusalem. So we are a media monitoring organisation, Honest Reporting. We deal specifically with anti-Israel media bias in the mainstream media, the traditional media, and also on social media as well, which of course, as I'm sure your viewers and readers know, has become a major battleground in terms of information, disinformation, misinformation. We basically go through all of the English language media, be it the UK press, the US press, other places, of course, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and we basically monitor all of these outlets to make sure that they are actually reporting fairly and honestly about the conflict here. I have been exposed to countless media articles, videos, etc. since last Saturday morning. I have a very small team. We've been working flat out to keep up with it all. It's been a real deluge, which is unsurprising because, of course, what's going on here is now pretty much the top story on every international media outlet. There was a major difference, perhaps, in the way things were being presented, dependent on where the journalists were reporting from. I think those who were able to get down to the south and see what had actually happened with their own eyes, you could see the looks on their faces, the horror of what they were seeing, because I think for a lot of these journalists, they'd never been exposed to something like this before. Even hardened war reporters were becoming visibly emotional at the shocking scenes. And we were hearing from the soldiers on the ground, the civilians who were there in the aftermath, the stories. I don't think anyone could really have been immune to the emotion behind that. These, I think, as human beings, and it really doesn't matter whether you take a side on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In this particular case, I think it has to be made absolutely clear that Hamas is a terrorist organization. It carried out acts of sheer brutality that have no rationalization in terms of the politics of this region. And I think one of the biggest problems we had, certainly at the beginning, was seeing a lot of articles were actually trying to explain the motivations behind Hamas, and not only calling them a militant organization, but I saw, for example, terms such as raiders, fighters, which of course gives a sort of an equivalence with, for example, the Israeli soldiers on the ground defending their citizens. And too many times I saw explanations as to what Hamas is, that they are looking for the creation of a Palestinian state, or they're looking for a peaceful solution to the conflict. Absolute nonsense. I think if anything has been proven in the last week, it is that Hamas, and we know this from their own charter, they've set out, they're not interested in a Palestinian state. They're not interested in peace. Their entire motivation is about killing Jews and wiping Israel off the face of the map. I think there's been this attempt by many in the media to create some sort of balance. I don't believe one can have a balance in a situation where it really is, it's black and white in terms of what physically happened on the ground in the south of Israel on October the 7th. I see, it's kind of easy way out for the press to call them militants or even fighters at worst, because I don't think the BBC wants to get into, wants to be seen to be taking sides, so they claim. However, my own organisation found plenty of examples in the past where the BBC has used the word terrorist, and they use it to describe people who operate on British soil, for example. So the 7/7 attacks would have been terrorist attacks. When British citizens are involved, and it's on the British mainland, we see it being referred to as terrorism. Now, one can say there is the role of anti-Semitism. I think that would be it's an unsophisticated reply. There is anti-Semitism out there, undoubtedly. But I think that what has happened over the years is that this particular conflict has been elevated to a level where other conflicts around the world aren't. One only has to look at the casualty figures from sort of 75 years since Israel was created, to see that the numbers of deaths are far, far lower over the course of 75 years than you get in the space of a couple of years in Syria, for example, or even the butchery going on in places like Yemen. I think that we are treated in Israel differently. On one hand, we should be held up to the international norms of human rights, which is absolutely fine, because Israel is a Western liberal democracy, and it does take international humanitarian law into account with everything it does. We value human life on all sides. We do absolutely our best to avoid civilian casualties. Unfortunately, and certainly in a situation like this, it's going to be unavoidable, and it's going to be heartbreaking. We have a lot of liberals who have, over the years, have taken the side of the Palestinians, because if you put it in simplest terms, it looks like it is perceived to be a David and Goliath battle. We have Israel with a powerful military. It is a developed country, westernized, against what we see as millions of Palestinians who don't have their own state. Unfortunately, a lot of the history behind this gets lost. It's very, very easy for supporters of the Palestinians and their spokespeople to blame everything on an occupation, without necessarily going into any of the finer details or the history of how we've reached this point. Particularly, for example, I've seen in the British media only a few weeks ago describing Gaza as being occupied by Israel or under siege, despite the fact that Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005 with the hope, the expectation that this particular area could potentially turn into a new Singapore. Lots of money being pumped into the place. Israel left behind a lot of agriculture and greenhouses for the Palestinians to use. All these were destroyed, and instead it was taken over in 2007 by Hamas, a vicious terrorist organization. In terms of the word siege, there is a blockade on Gaza. It's an Israeli and Egyptian blockade, because both countries recognize that anything that goes into Gaza is being requisitioned by Hamas to increase its terrorist infrastructure. No, I'm very, very, very concerned. Obviously, I don't think anyone can feel anything but sympathy for the 2 million Gazans civilians who've been caught up in this catastrophic event. Having said that, we have to remember, and the press has to remember, why this has happened. I just taking it from a British perspective, if that number of civilians, British citizens, had been massacred in this way, the British people would be demanding that their government take action. And unfortunately, in this particular situation, Israel has no option but to take military action. This is not a war that anyone wanted. This was a war that's been forced upon the country. And it's a war that if Israel does not win, does not come out on top, it really is a serious problem for the future, because no Israeli citizen will be able to live in this land without worrying about their personal security. And there are plenty of other actors out there, including the Iranians, in particular, Hezbollah, a vicious Iranian proxy terrorist organization on our northern border, with thousands of rockets pointed at us, sophisticated rockets that are already engaged in fighting on the border, and possibly looking to expand the conflict further. Essentially, this is really a battle over Western values and norms, which is why we've seen countries like Britain and the Americans coming to Israel's aid and supporting it like this. I would ask your audience to think about the casualty figures, because at the moment, many of them from Gaza are being supplied by the Ministry of Health in Gaza, which is run by Hamas, who rule the Gaza Strip. Now, Hamas isn't going to tell you how many of these people, these casualties, are civilians and how many are actually terrorists or combatants. Israel is being very, very targeted with where it's fighting right now, where it's using its airstrikes, and we're going after terrorist targets. Sadly, of course, Hamas has embedded itself within the civilian population, within the infrastructure there, making it absolutely unavoidable to avoid these civilian deaths and casualties, even though, of course, Israel's doing its absolute most to try and get the people out of there. So this is it's an incredibly sad thing. Hamas is responsible for its population, and it's also responsible for using them as human shields. Other things that we spotted, for example, there were reports of an airstrike on a civilian convoy that was moving south just the other day. Now, unfortunately, like I said, a lot of press are getting their reports directly from the voices of Hamas. In this particular case, the IDF looked into it, have denied this, and told us that there were no operations going on in that area at the time. And indeed, if one slows down the footage of this particular explosion, you can actually see that there was no rocket actually fired from overhead. This was an actual explosion on the ground. And we believe that there are a lot of booby traps and IEDs that are being used in the area, including by Hamas, which has a vested interest in making sure its people do not move south. Because, of course, it's in Hamas's interest to see more dead Palestinian bodies, because what that does is it increases the pressure on Israel to abort its mission. If it's a factual error, then of course, there is the chance that we will be able to get a correction. Unfortunately, in a fast-moving situation like this, the damage is already done. You can tell from my accent. I was born in the UK. I have family there, and I see what's going on in London right now, and it's very, very worrying. It's concerning, and a lot of the tensions are also increased due to the media coverage. Just to give you an example of something that we saw just the other day, Sky News were reporting from the demonstration at the heart of London, and they interviewed someone who claimed to be Jewish. Now, first of all, I think that's problematic in itself to pick someone like that out of a crowd of thousands, because what does that say? You're trying to find a Jew to condemn Israel, despite the fact that the vast majority of British Jews are Israel supporters. And this particular person they interviewed, apart from calling Israel a colonialist state and an apartheid state, it wasn't difficult for me to track who she was. She's actually the chairperson of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Hastings in the south of England. So she's a professional anti-Israel activist. And Sky News did not tell their viewers this before she was interviewed. So there she is being interviewed as a Jew, when in fact she's actually part of a very, very small, unrepresentative fringe of people who aren't part of the Jewish community, but are part of the anti-Israel activism that we're seeing. And that, to me, is poor journalism.